In 1480, amid the narrow streets of Rome where sunlight mingled with shadows, Lucretia Borgia was born. The world she entered was a macabre masquerade of power and crime, where priests and cardinals would pray while weaving dark plots in the corners of their chambers. Her father, Rodrigo Borgia, who would later wear 3 papal crowns as Pope Alexander VI, had already begun weaving a web of manipulation around his illegitimate children, with Lucretia at the center of his cunning schemes. She was born from Rodrigo's liaison with Vannozza de Catane, a sharp-witted woman navigating the treacherous waters of ambition and intrigue. Lucretia's birth outside wedlock did not mark an end for her future. Instead, it became the first link that would pull her into the machinery of the Borgia family's power and corruption. In Rome at that time, tales of lust, bribery, and murder were not just whispered rumors. They were a reality observed by all, from cardinals to common citizens. From an early age, Lucretia was not raised with moral lessons or prayers. Instead, she learned to survive among predators, where every gaze might conceal a hidden threat. By the age of 11, she was betrothed, twice, first to a Spanish noble, then abruptly reassigned to another suitor as political tides shifted. These marriages were never about love. They were transactions, where her body and name were currency for alliances. In 1492, when Rodrigo ascended to the papacy as Alexander VI, his lust for power and indulgence reached new heights. 12-year-old Lucretia witnessed her father buying the papal throne with bribes and promises, an act that sent shivers even through a corruption-laden era. He immediately began using his position to enrich the family and satisfy his ambitions, demonstrating that in the Borgia world, morality was subservient to gain. At 13, Lucretia was married to Giovanni Sforza in a grand Vatican ceremony. The union was a political merger rather than a marriage of hearts. The young bride, with her long golden hair and ethereal beauty, retained an appearance of innocence, though a sharp intellect was already forming within her, a tool for survival. The wedding chamber became a place under surveillance. Her family often observed, recorded, and even intervened in her most private moments. Privacy, dignity, and innocence were sacrificed at the altar of power and control. Not only her father, but her brother Cesare also cast a long shadow over her life. Rodrigo's ambitions and desires were enforced by Cesare, a living instrument of violence, who simultaneously pursued political schemes and asserted possessiveness over Lucretia. She was thrust into perilous relationships, where every move carried risk. In those formative years, Lucretia learned a cold lesson. Love and power were not hers to possess. As her father and brother manipulated marriages, forged alliances, and eliminated threats, the young girl realized she was not a free human being, but a tool for influence. Rome, with its opulent palaces and bell-towered streets, became a labyrinth where crime and deception hid beneath the surface of Renaissance, art, and architecture. Within this environment, Lucretia began shaping a survival instinct. Every glance, gesture, smile, or tear became a tool to influence her surroundings. Even as a child, she studied, analyzed, and protected herself, preparing for a life where her body was an instrument of political leverage, yet her mind was learning to assert control in subtle ways. Rome at this time was more than a religious center. It was a school of ruthless power. From brutal banquets to intricate political maneuvers, Lucretia witnessed it all and absorbed the lessons. Each observation helped her understand the delicate balance of influence, manipulation, and survival in a world where appearances masked deadly intent. By 1494, the city of Rome was simmering with both grandeur and corruption. The Borgia's influence had grown immeasurably under Pope Alexander VI, and Lucretia, now 14, had become a silent observer of a world defined by schemes and brutality. The once innocent child was learning to understand the unspoken rules of survival. Power demanded manipulation, and weakness was exploited without mercy. Lucretia's days were divided between the public splendor of her father's court and the private lessons imposed by her mother and brother. She learned languages, courtly etiquette, and the subtle arts of persuasion, but the lessons came with constant reminders. Obedience and compliance were not just expected, they were demanded. Her intelligence became her shield, her beauty a weapon, and her silence a cloak. Every smile was calculated, every gesture weighed carefully. Rome itself was a city of contrasts. Outside the Borgia palaces, merchants shouted over bustling markets, and beggars huddled in shadows beneath arches, while inside, golden halls were adorned with frescoes, tapestries, and candle-lit grandeur. Lucretia moved through these spaces, like a ghost, absorbing everything, the whispers, the power plays, and the subtle intimidation that surrounded her family. She was learning not only how to survive, but also how to anticipate the desires and fears of others. Her brother Cesare had grown more domineering. At 16, he had become a figure of fear and fascination, commanding loyalty and obedience from those around him. Lucretia watched him orchestrate political marriages, intimidate rivals, and execute plans with ruthless efficiency. She realized early that in the Borgia household, every interaction could be a test. Trust was a luxury she could not afford, and every alliance might conceal betrayal. The young Lucretia's first taste of personal danger came unexpectedly. During a grand feast at the Vatican, a rival family attempted to insult the Borgias by subtly mocking her father's illegitimate children. Lucretia, seated quietly at the edge of the hall, understood the meaning immediately. Her cheeks flushed, not with anger, but with calculation. Every word spoken, every glance exchanged, was a chess move in a game she had barely begun to understand. That evening, she learned the power of subtlety, of observing rather than reacting, and how a carefully chosen look could disarm a threat more effectively than force. As her father's influence expanded into Naples, Florence, and beyond, Lucretia became an inadvertent participant in political intrigue. She was presented in courts across Italy, her presence a symbol of the Borgias' growing power. Nobles whispered about her beauty, her poise, and the eerie awareness in her young eyes. Each appearance reinforced her status as both a pawn and a tool. But it also allowed her to observe human nature at close range, the vanity, greed, and ambition that ruled men and women alike. During this period, Lucretia also encountered moments of fleeting tenderness. Her mother, Vanozza, would sometimes embrace her in quiet chambers, whispering encouragement and offering comfort in a world that demanded constant vigilance. These moments were precious, fleeting reprieves from the constant tension of her upbringing. Lucretia treasured them, storing them in her memory like hidden gems, even as she realized that the real world offered little in the way of genuine affection. The political marriages continued to shape her adolescence. Each engagement, each promise, of union with foreign nobility, carried hidden agendas. Lucretia's beauty was leveraged to secure loyalty, forge alliances, and cement the Borgia reputation. Though she was often frightened, she also became aware of her own capacity to influence outcomes, to bend others subtly through appearance, demeanor, or carefully chosen words. She was learning the art of survival and manipulation. Even within the Vatican, danger loomed. Assassinations, betrayals, and scandals were constant. Lucretia learned that power could be wielded with both kindness and cruelty, and that the line between ally and enemy was always shifting. She practiced discretion and observation, silently recording the behavior of those around her, anticipating threats and opportunities alike. Each lesson, painful or subtle, forged resilience in her young mind. By the end of her 14th year, Lucretia had become a figure both admired and feared, not yet fully understood by the adult world. Her beauty remained striking, yet her eyes betrayed the wisdom and wariness of someone who had witnessed too much too early. She had begun to recognize that her family's ambitions would shape her destiny, but she also understood that intelligence, poise, and self-control could provide a measure of freedom in a world designed to exploit her. The shadows of power stretched long over Lucretia's adolescence, but within those shadows, she began to cultivate a quiet strength. She learned that survival depended not only on obedience but on cunning, on knowing when to speak and when to remain silent, when to yield and when to assert. Her innocence was slowly tempered by calculation. Her childhood replaced by the disciplined preparation of a young woman forced to navigate a treacherous political landscape. By the year 1496, Lucretia had entered her 16th year, and the world around her had grown even darker and more complex. The Borgia family's influence now extended beyond Rome, stretching into the courts of Naples, Venice, and Florence. Lucretia, no longer a passive observer, found herself drawn into a network of alliances, secrets, and dangers that tested both her wit and her courage. Her beauty had matured, becoming a tool that both awed and intimidated those around her. Nobles whispered behind her back, evaluating her as much for the strategic value she offered as for her delicate features and porcelain complexion. In the shadows of the Vatican and palaces across Italy, Lucretia learned that her presence alone could sway decisions, create envy, or provoke fear. Every smile, every glance, and every carefully modulated gesture became an instrument in a game far larger than she had ever imagined. Cesare, now fully in command of the family's military and political ambitions, became both protector and source of tension for Lucretia. He demanded absolute loyalty, instructing her in the subtleties of court politics, the manipulation of allies, and the recognition of hidden threats. At the same time, his shadow loomed over her, a constant reminder of the family's ruthlessness. Every misstep, he warned, could bring ruin not just to her, but to the entire Borgia dynasty. Lucretia's daily life was a delicate balance of learning, observation, and calculated social maneuvering. She attended grand balls and ceremonies, her presence carefully choreographed to display obedience and charm simultaneously. Courtiers and foreign diplomats studied her closely, and she quickly discovered the power of silence. By listening, observing, and carefully selecting when to speak, she began to influence those around her without ever raising suspicion. Danger also came in subtler forms. Poisoned letters, secret alliances, and veiled threats were part of her education. In one memorable encounter, Lucretia discovered a hidden message tucked into a religious text she was reading in her chamber. The letter hinted at a plot to weaken her father's position in Florence. Rather than panic, she memorized the details, committing them to memory and reporting only what was necessary. In that moment, she realized the importance of discretion and the ability to act unseen, a skill that would serve her well in the years to come. Romantic intrigues also began to touch her world. Young noblemen, captivated by her beauty and apparent innocence, attempted to charm her. Lucretia, however, had learned that flattery was often a disguise for ambition. She responded with polite indifference, her eyes betraying a sharp intelligence and a mind that measured both opportunity and risk. Even in these early encounters, she began to understand how to wield her attractiveness as a shield and a weapon, turning potential vulnerability into leverage. The shadow of political marriages continued to loom. The Borgias sought alliances that would strengthen their dominance, and Lucretia was at the center of many of these plans. Each engagement, though presented as an honor, carried the weight of strategy. Lucretia endured these pressures with an outward calm, even as the fear of being sacrificed for power burned quietly inside her. She understood that her compliance was necessary, but her mind was already plotting ways to maintain agency in a world designed to control her. Even within the Borgia family, tension simmered. Rodrigo's ambitions as pope sometimes clashed with Cesare's military strategies, and Lucretia observed these conflicts with growing awareness. She began to see the cracks in the family's seemingly invincible armor, understanding that every decision could have consequences reaching far beyond immediate appearances. This realization sharpened her instincts, teaching her that survival required foresight, patience, and the courage to act at the right moment. By the end of her 16th year, Lucretia had transformed from a quiet, observant girl into a young woman capable of navigating treacherous waters. She had learned to interpret motives, anticipate danger, and manipulate perception. Her beauty remained a potent tool, but it was her intelligence and discretion that had become her true assets. She had survived the initial tests of the Borgia court and now stood on the threshold of a more dangerous, more complex world, where every decision could alter the fate of herself and her family. In the quiet moments, when candlelight flickered across her chamber walls, Lucretia often reflected on the paradox of her life. She was both protected and imprisoned by her family, admired yet feared, a pawn and an emerging strategist. The lessons of power, betrayal, and survival were relentless, but she had learned to endure and to adapt. As she gazed out over the city of Rome from her balcony, she knew that her journey was far from over, and that the web of intrigue she had entered would demand every ounce of cunning and courage she possessed. By 1497, Lucretia's awareness of the dangers surrounding her had sharpened into a keen instinct. The Borgia family, while seemingly invincible, was riddled with enemies, both obvious and hidden. In the labyrinthine corridors of Rome, secrets festered like shadows, and trust had become a commodity rarer than gold. The first major test came, unexpectedly. A minor noble, seeking favor with Cesare, approached Lucretia with a proposal disguised as flattery. He suggested she influence her father's decisions on an upcoming treaty with Florence. Lucretia's heart raced as she weighed her options. Any misstep could ignite conflict or even put her life at risk. Yet, she had learned that hesitation could be more dangerous than action. In a dimly lit chamber, she invited the noble to speak freely, listening with a calm demeanor while silently plotting. Each word he uttered was a thread in a complex tapestry of power. By asking subtle questions, she gauged his true intentions. When he departed, she reported only selective information to Cesare, maintaining the illusion of compliance while safeguarding her own position. The thrill of control mixed with the ever-present fear, forging her into a master of subtle manipulation. Meanwhile, the city of Rome itself was a stage for intrigue. Streets echoed with whispers of rebellion, and rival families plotted to undermine the Borgias. Lucretia observed these movements keenly from the windows of her chambers, where the bustling streets below seemed alive with conspiracy. Carriages rolled past, guards patrolled, and merchants exchanged coded messages, all unnoticed by the ordinary citizenry. Each detail was noted in Lucretia's mind, a growing map of danger and opportunity. At home, tensions within the family escalated. Rodrigo's papal decisions clashed with Cesare's military campaigns, creating fissures in what had once seemed an unshakable power structure. Lucretia, now confident in her observations, began subtly influencing outcomes, offering suggestions that would prevent open conflict while advancing her family's interests. Her presence at council meetings and informal gatherings became more than ceremonial. It was strategic. Love and desire, always intertwined with politics, added another layer of peril. A young diplomat from Florence attempted to charm her with gifts and flattery, but Lucretia's mind was already calculating the potential consequences of alliance or rejection. She realized that romantic affection could be weaponized, either to trap her or to extend her influence. Her composure never faltered. She accepted gestures of politeness while mentally cataloging potential threats. One night, an urgent summons arrived. Cesare had uncovered a plot to assassinate a key ally in Naples, a maneuver that could destabilize Borgia power in southern Italy. Lucretia accompanied him discreetly, observing the unfolding strategy. She witnessed how threats were neutralized with precision, how misdirection and intimidation worked hand in hand, and how loyalty was tested under pressure. Her admiration for Cesare's skill was tinged with unease. She understood that mastery of such power demanded ruthlessness, a quality she would need to cultivate herself. By mid-year, Lucretia's reputation had begun to spread. Courtiers whispered of her intelligence, her composure, and her uncanny ability to navigate treacherous waters without faltering. Some admired her, others envied or feared her, but all recognized that she was no longer merely a daughter of the Borgias. She was an emerging force in her own right. Even in her quiet moments, she sensed the delicate balance she maintained. One miscalculation could unravel everything she had learned to control. The year closed with a stark lesson. A trusted servant, bribed by an enemy, attempted to pass false intelligence to Lucretia. She detected the deceit instantly, exposing the servant while safeguarding the family's interests. The betrayal was a harsh reminder that in her world, loyalty was transient, and danger could emerge from the most unexpected corners. Lucretia understood that survival was no longer a matter of obedience alone. It required vigilance, cunning, and the courage to act decisively when necessary. By the end of 1497, Lucretia had evolved further into a young woman of formidable presence. She was beautiful, yes, but her allure was intertwined with intelligence, foresight, and an ever-deepening understanding of human nature. Rome remained a city of shadows, but she had learned to navigate its darkness with a steady hand, positioning herself not just as a Borgia daughter, but as a player in the deadly game of politics, power, and survival. As 1498 unfolded, the city of Rome seemed to hum with tension, each corner alive with plotting and veiled intentions. Lucretia had grown adept at reading subtle cues, discerning the difference between genuine allegiance and hidden malice. But even her keen perception would be tested like never before. A fresh wave of conspiracies erupted when a prominent nobleman, resentful of Borgia dominance, began courting allies to undermine Cesare's military campaigns. Rumors of betrayal reached the family before the conspirators could act openly. Lucretia, now a trusted observer in sensitive matters, was called upon to assess the threat. She pored over letters, intercepted messages, and eyewitness accounts, piecing together a complex web of deceit. Each revelation heightened the stakes. A single misstep could trigger bloodshed or political collapse. At night, she would wander the corridors of the Borgia palace, tracing her fingers along carved wooden panels, listening to the distant murmur of guards and servants. In these moments of solitude, she honed her instincts, imagining possible outcomes and rehearsing her interventions. Her beauty and innocence were now masks behind which lay the sharpened mind of a strategist, attuned to danger and opportunity alike. One particularly tense encounter involved a visiting dignitary who had been secretly negotiating with Cesare's rivals. Lucretia met him in the library under the pretense of formal courtesy. Every gesture was measured. Every word was a calculated piece in the dance of deception. She noticed the slight tremor in his hand as he offered a document, the hesitation in his voice, the fleeting glance to the shadows. Recognizing the signs of duplicity, she subtly maneuvered the conversation, extracting information while leaving him convinced of his advantage. Meanwhile, Cesare continued his military campaigns with ruthless precision. Yet Lucretia observed cracks even in his seemingly invincible strategy. A poorly placed ally here, a misjudged rumor there. Each tiny flaw was a foothold for enemies. She catalogued these weaknesses, reporting them delicately to Cesare, careful not to offend him while ensuring that no critical detail went unaddressed. Her guidance, though subtle, often prevented calamity and strengthened the Borgia position. Complications arose closer to home. Rodrigo's health began to falter and his moods grew unpredictable. Lucretia found herself navigating the shifting tides of her father's temper while still attending to the larger political stage. A single misplaced word could trigger rage or suspicion. She learned to anticipate his reactions, tempering her own emotions and presenting counsel with tact and precision. The lessons of survival from her childhood were now indispensable tools in the high-stakes arena of adult politics. Amidst these trials, Lucretia encountered unexpected kindness in the form of a young tutor, a scholar with quiet intellect and unwavering patience. Their discussions, held in candlelit chambers filled with the scent of parchment and ink, offered brief respite from intrigue. She appreciated the moments of genuine connection, yet she remained ever wary. Trust was a delicate commodity, and her survival depended on balancing openness with caution. A pivotal moment came during a clandestine meeting where Lucretia uncovered a plot to assassinate a minor Borgia ally, a plan orchestrated by a coalition of rival families. Acting swiftly, she devised a countermeasure, sending coded messages to loyal servants and manipulating timing to prevent disaster. The operation was executed flawlessly, and the conspirators were left unaware that their scheme had been anticipated. The thrill of victory was tempered by the realization that every triumph invited new enemies, each more determined than the last. By the end of 1498, Lucretia had evolved into a formidable presence within her family and the broader political sphere of Rome. Her reputation as intelligent, composed, and unflinchingly perceptive had solidified, yet the cost of such mastery weighed heavily. She had learned that beauty and charm were weapons, that knowledge was armor, and that survival demanded both cunning and courage. Every shadow, every whispered conversation, and every fleeting glance carried meaning, and she had become an expert at reading them all. Lucretia understood that the web of deceit around her was ever expanding. Allies could become enemies, enemies could disguise themselves as friends, and danger lurked even in the familiar corridors of her own home. She had survived thus far, not through brute strength or open defiance, but through observation, calculation, and an unyielding will. And she knew that to endure the coming years, her vigilance could never waver. As 1499 dawned over the city of Rome, the political landscape had grown increasingly perilous. Lucretia, now well versed in the subtle art of observation and manipulation, found herself facing threats not only from the outside, but from within her own family. The Borgia household, a place of apparent unity, was a labyrinth of ambition, jealousy, and hidden resentment. Rodrigo's declining health had exacerbated tensions among his children. Cesare's unyielding drive for military dominance left little room for familial bonds, and the younger siblings began jockeying for attention, favor, and influence. Lucretia, despite her youth, understood that alliances within the family could be as treacherous as those outside. Every gesture, every whispered conversation could be a test, a challenge to her acumen and authority. A confrontation arose when one of her brothers, emboldened by Cesare's absences, attempted to undermine her influence. He accused her of overstepping her role, questioning her motives in matters of family strategy. Lucretia, composed and unflinching, responded with subtle precision. She allowed him to speak, gauged his temperament, and countered with carefully chosen words that highlighted his misjudgments without direct confrontation. The result, the brother, chastened yet outwardly unscathed, retreated, while Lucretia's reputation as both clever and indispensable solidified. Yet the challenges were far from over. Whispers of betrayal reached her ears. A trusted servant had been caught in correspondence with rivals, passing minor secrets that could grow into deadly revelations. Lucretia, recognizing the potential for catastrophe, orchestrated a delicate intervention. She confronted the servant privately, employing a mix of empathy and quiet intimidation, ensuring the individual understood the severity of the situation without exposing internal fractures to the wider household. At the same time, Lucretia's role in Cesare's campaigns became increasingly pronounced. She advised on matters of logistics, troop movements, and the timing of critical offensives. Her insights, often overlooked by those blinded by pride or fear, proved invaluable in preventing missteps. Even Cesare, usually impervious to counsel, acknowledged her acumen in private, a silent nod to her growing importance. The palace itself became a theater of constant vigilance. Lucretia walked its halls with measured steps, eyes scanning for subtle signs of unrest. She noted a tense exchange between two courtiers in the dining hall, the furtive glance of a page carrying a message, the subtle tremor in Rodrigo's hand as he signed documents. Each observation became a piece of a larger puzzle, guiding her decisions and interventions. One chilling episode involved a secret meeting of nobles plotting to exploit Rodrigo's weakened condition. Lucretia, informed by a network of loyal informants, prepared a countermeasure. She ensured loyal guards were strategically positioned, intercepted communications, and subtly manipulated the timing of Rodrigo's appearances to foil the conspirators. When the plot inevitably collapsed, the conspirators were left bewildered, unaware of the invisible hand that had orchestrated their failure. Amid these dangers, Lucretia also experienced moments of personal reflection. Alone in her chamber, she gazed out at the moonlit streets of Rome, contemplating the duality of her existence. The innocence of childhood was long gone, replaced by a blend of intellect, cunning, and resilience. She recognized that power within. The family was a double-edged sword. It offered protection and influence, yet demanded constant vigilance, sacrifice, and the suppression of personal desire. Her bond with her young tutor continued to provide solace. In the quiet hours, they discussed literature, philosophy, and the broader currents of European politics. These moments, brief though they were, reminded Lucretia of a world beyond intrigue, a world of thought, creativity, and the rarest form of trust. But she never allowed herself to become vulnerable. knowing that any lapse could be exploited by those eager to claim her position or destroy her reputation. By the end of the year, Lucretia had navigated an intricate web of familial and political dangers, emerging not only unscathed but stronger, wiser, and more formidable. She had learned that survival required more than beauty, intelligence, or charm. It demanded intuition, decisiveness, and the courage to act even when the outcome was uncertain. Within the shadows of the Borgia family, she had claimed a place, not merely as a daughter, but as a strategist, observer, and protector, a role that would define her life in the turbulent years ahead. The year 1500 arrived with a tense undercurrent of unease. Rome, resplendent in its grandeur, hid a labyrinth of schemes, betrayal, and ambition beneath its golden facades. For Lucretia, the Borgia household, already a treacherous microcosm of power struggles, became even more perilous. Cesare's growing influence in the papal armies meant that enemies, both domestic and foreign, watched every move, eager to exploit the slightest misstep. One morning, Lucretia received news that sent a shiver down her spine. A distant relative, long thought loyal, had conspired with rival families to undermine Cesare's military campaigns. The letters intercepted by her network revealed plans for ambushes, sabotage of supplies, and whispers of assassination. Lucretia, recognizing the catastrophic potential, immediately began assembling a careful counter-strategy. Every detail had to be precise. Even a single miscalculation could cost lives. She first convened a discreet meeting with trusted allies within the household. The chamber, dimly lit by flickering torches, became a war room. Maps of Rome and surrounding territories were spread across the table. Lucretia traced routes, highlighted potential vulnerabilities, and issued instructions with calm authority. Her advisors, accustomed to Cesare's boldness, were startled by the precision and foresight she demonstrated. Meanwhile, a subtle tension built between Lucretia and her siblings. A younger brother, sensing her growing prominence, attempted to sow doubt in Cesare's mind about her loyalty. The attempt was both bold and reckless. Lucretia, perceiving the maneuver with a mix of caution and calculated assertiveness, confronted him in private. With an air of composed elegance, she reminded him of the delicate balance that preserved the family's position and hinted at consequences for recklessness. The brother, chastened, learned that cunning alone was not enough. Awareness and timing were crucial. In the midst of these internal challenges, Lucretia's role in Cesare's military intelligence became indispensable. She analyzed intercepted letters, scrutinized the loyalty of various captains, and anticipated enemy maneuvers. Her interventions prevented several potential disasters. A convoy of weapons was redirected before an ambush. A message of betrayal was intercepted and neutralized, and a corrupt official was quietly removed from a sensitive post. Each success, achieved without fanfare, strengthened her reputation as a subtle yet formidable force. One evening, the danger struck closer than ever. Lucretia received an urgent warning from a loyal servant. Assassins had infiltrated the outskirts of the palace grounds, intending to take advantage of Cesare's absence. With rapid precision, she organized guards, secured entrances, and orchestrated a series of misleading signals to confuse the attackers. When the assassins arrived, they found the palace unnervingly well prepared, their plan foiled by the unseen hand of a young woman whose beauty masked lethal intelligence. Amid these crises, Lucretia continued to navigate the intricate social rituals of the papal court. Banquets, audiences, and public appearances demanded composure, elegance, and subtle diplomacy. One evening during a grand feast, she observed a foreign diplomat subtly signaling to a conspirator within the household. Using nothing more than discreet gestures and carefully timed questions, she diverted suspicion and protected critical information, all while maintaining an outward appearance of serenity. Yet the psychological toll of constant vigilance was immense. Alone in her chambers, Lucretia often reflected on the duality of her existence, a life of calculated strategy and public poise, shadowed by threats both overt and hidden. Sleep was fragmented. Trust was a commodity more precious than gold. Despite these hardships, she remained resolute, her mind sharpening with every challenge. She had become a master of anticipation, intuition, and survival, qualities that her enemies neither recognized nor suspected. By the close of 1500, Lucretia had not only preserved her family's position, but had actively strengthened it. The conspiracies that threatened to unravel the Borgia influence had been neutralized, and her influence within both familial and political spheres had grown more pronounced. Yet she understood that this was but a temporary respite. The web of intrigue surrounding the Borgia family tightened with every passing day, and she, now seasoned by trials of cunning, deception, and strategy, was both the shield and silent architect of their continued survival. The year 1501 brought with it a sense of inevitability. The streets of Rome, bright and bustling under the Mediterranean sun, belied the storm that churned behind the walls of palaces and private chambers. For Lucretia, every step, every word, every smile carried the weight of survival, influence, and the ever-present shadow of danger. Her journey, from innocent child to calculating strategist, had now reached a precipice. Cesare, emboldened by military victories and papal favor, extended his reach into the northern territories, leaving the Borgia palace momentarily exposed. It was during this interval that Lucretia encountered her greatest challenge. A coalition of rival families, sensing opportunity, had conspired to strike at the heart of the Borgia influence. Letters arrived, threats veiled in ornate calligraphy, demanding submission or hinting at the ruin awaiting those who resisted. Lucretia read each with calm precision, noting patterns, identifying allies, and calculating the sequence of possible outcomes. Her first decisive action was subtle, yet profoundly effective. She orchestrated a meeting with the most volatile faction, presenting a carefully crafted narrative of loyalty and feigned weakness. Her words, imbued with innocence and subtlety, sowed doubt among their leaders, creating fractures where once there was unity. By the time Cesare returned, the conspiracy had begun to unravel, its leaders wary and divided, unsure of whom to trust. Meanwhile, the palace itself had become a stage for the complex interplay of power and deceit. Lucretia moved through halls, adorned with frescoes and gilded arches, her presence both understated and commanding. She intercepted messages, guided servants, and monitored the movements of guests with an instinct sharpened by years of danger. Her ability to perceive threats before they fully materialized had become almost uncanny, earning her quiet reverence among the household. Yet, even as her influence grew, the emotional toll was profound. She found solace only in brief moments of solitude, where candlelight and shadow allowed her a fragile reprieve from the constant vigilance required of her. In these moments, she contemplated the duality of her existence, a life lived in the open court of appearances, and a shadow life governed by strategy and caution. Despite fatigue and occasional despair, she refused to falter. Every decision was deliberate, every action measured, for one misstep could undo years of careful navigation. The culmination of her efforts came during a critical banquet, held to celebrate Cesare's latest triumph. Ambassadors, courtiers, and envoys filled the hall, each aware of the delicate balance between diplomacy and rivalry. Lucretia, positioned near the center, maintained her composed demeanor while orchestrating a series of subtle maneuvers, signaling loyal allies, redirecting the attention of potential spies, and ensuring that every word spoken, every gesture made, served the family's interests. The tension, barely perceptible to outsiders, was electric. At the height of the evening, a covert threat emerged. An assassin, cloaked in the guise of a servant, approached a key figure within the household. Lucretia, anticipating such a move, had placed vigilant guards and created diversions that neutralized the danger without public alarm. The would-be killer was intercepted and removed quietly, leaving no trace of disruption, her calm efficiency preserving both life and reputation. By night's end, the Borgia family remained unscathed, their power unchallenged, and Lucretia's reputation cemented as a master of subtle strategy and quiet authority. She had become a linchpin of survival, her intellect and foresight transforming threats into opportunities. Even those who underestimated her now regarded her with cautious respect, recognizing that beneath the soft beauty lay a mind capable of orchestrating survival amid chaos. As she retreated to her private chambers, The weight of her journey settled upon her. From the innocence of childhood, through the perils of adolescence, to the calculated influence of adulthood, Lucretia had navigated a world where every smile could mask betrayal and every gesture could conceal ambition. She understood, as she gazed at the moonlit city through tall windows, that survival demanded vigilance, cunning, and an unwavering grasp of reality. Yet within her burned the spark of resilience, the unyielding will to endure and thrive. The chapter and the period of her life chronicled here closed not with triumph alone, but with a tempered acknowledgement of the costs paid. Trust was fragile, peace fleeting, and danger omnipresent. Lucretia, standing at the edge of destiny, was prepared to continue her path, unbowed, ever watchful, and ever capable of navigating the treacherous currents of power, ambition, and survival.